told you our curious monkey friend known as George is actually not a monkey, and in fact, something else entirely. Maybe it's about how he was originally found, or maybe it's something else that I've discovered after watching all three of the major films. What is up, everybody, and welcome back to Animated Cartoon Conspiracy Theory, the same exact show that is always trying to break your childhood. I mean, the last time that we did something had to do with SpongeBob and Peppa Pig. Evil cults? Check. Breaking the Flying Dutchman's curse and who's his boss? Check. And above all, I never anticipated that you guys would want a Curious George theory. Heck, if you notice, we just crossed over into 100,000 plus subscriber territory. And that is just thanks to all of you guys that have joined so far. I'll try my best to bring even more interesting videos and theories along the way, but Curious George was not on my list. You guys voted for this. And the craziest thing is that I've always been a fan of Curious George. Ever since I was little, I used to watch and read the books. Curious George was always interesting. Now, that if you don't know much about Curious George happens to be a book series that was turned into a TV show that would be on PBS Kids and run there. It's about a monkey who gets on adventures and usually has to use his problem-solving skills in order to overcome small obstacles and make friends. In fact, in the show, he's able to explore even more than what he does in the movies. He's able to learn how to cook with a chef, which is highly unsanitary, learn how to talk and play with squirrels, and of course, learn how to fish with friends. And although there are a few million questions that I have about the TV show, I chose to focus instead on the movies that came out. And lo and behold, I didn't know that there was 3 movies. I seen the first one when I was a kid, and it always had the best soundtrack. The first movie had that one song, Insider. That song has always stuck with me. And although the second and third film don't have a great soundtrack that compares to the first one, these movies are very interesting. So interesting that I found a couple things that might make you question what exactly is going on. And while I'd love to go ahead and talk about the TV show a lot more, the TV show and the movie series are actually canonically different. They do not share the same universe. But upon watching the movies, I can tell that something is different with George. He is not simply a monkey. He might even be a god, or even worse, an alien species that has come down onto this planet to observe and learn everything. Don't believe me? Well, strap in, overthinkers, because this ride is about to get wild. So if we take a look at the very first film, the plot is very simple. We find out that the man with the yellow hat, whose real name is actually Ted, go figure, I didn't know that after I don't know how many years, works at a museum who is losing customer interest. In fact, the museum is dying and probably would have to be sold if they did not make a new exhibit. So then Ted volunteers to go to Central Africa to find the lost shrine of Zagwa in hopes that he could bring it back and save the museum with a brand new exhibit. While the man with the yellow hat goes off on his journey, we do get to see a glimpse of George's early life where he seems to be the only monkey in the whole jungle. He still does wild antics. He also gets in trouble with all of the parent animals because he's playing with their kids. But pay close attention to that because George is literally the only monkey in the forest. We'll come back to that later, of course. And later on, George ends up bumping into the man with the yellow hat, and they continue on to find the lost idol, or so they think, and they end up finding what is a shrine of the lost idol, which is 10 times tinier than what they thought they would find. And while the shrine has ancient text that says, turn your eye to the light and go from blindness to sight, we can glean 2 major things with this. One, this is talking about curiosity, and number 2 is that the man with the yellow hat knows ancient African languages, which is pretty smart on his part, but he's pretty much a doofus throughout all of the movies that we see. While having to go home, George ends up stowing away on the ship while they go back to America. And this kickstarts the journey of the man with the yellow hat and George. But at this point of the film, or any part of the film, we still do not see that George is actually a god. In fact, in this film and all the films that come after, none of them actually support George being God, but they do in fact support him being a higher intelligence being. In other words, an alien. In fact, in one of the first shenanigans that the man with the yellow hat and George get in together is with the opera lady. She happens to live inside of the same apartment building that Ted does, but as soon as they get over there, George is seen painting her walls. The opera lady finds out, the man with the yellow hat gets kicked out of the apartment, and they go on about their business. But what George paints is the most important thing, because what George ends up painting is an exact painting of the jungle, including himself and what he looks like. which should actually be impossible. Not only does it say that George has the abilities to have artistic integrity, but he's able to recognize that he is his own person, which is technically not really possible in the real world. Now, if you've never heard of a thing called the mirror test, this is exactly what I mean. The mirror test is a way for scientists to test if an animal actually has self-awareness by seeing if they recognize themselves inside of a mirror. Sometimes they do this by literally giving the animal knockout gas and then placing a mirror in front of them, and when they wake up, they observe what happens. They try to see whether they recognize themselves, ignore it completely, or treat it as another thing. Most of the time, what scientists observe is that animals will respond with social behaviors. Either they'll get very upset or they'll try to communicate it as if it's another being. Most research findings find that very few animals recognize that it is in fact themselves and not another animal. And what's even crazier is that chimpanzees, which are most often studied, are not really conclusive in their findings. Some do recognize themselves while most don't, but they still do not recognize themselves all the time. And to make matters even worse, younger chimpanzees have a harder time understanding who they are. And as far as we know, Curious George is a young chimpanzee. But do you know what animal actually does recognize itself more often? A horse. A lot of different species of birds like magpies or crows. Who knew bird brains and horse brains are pretty smart at recognizing who they are. But this one thing does help to separate George from a normal monkey. Most human children do not even gain self-awareness until they're about 1 to 2 years old. And George recognizes himself even though he's a young chimpanzee, which is a hard thing for chimpanzees to do. And if you still don't believe that George has a higher intelligence than normal, we have to take a look at the second film and some of the things that they do in there. Now, in the second film, which objectively is the worst film out of the three, George and the man with the yellow hat end up going to a magic show where they happen to steal an elephant by mistake. And every time the man with the yellow hat tries to return the elephant, they get further and further away from their goal, pushing them all the way out into the countryside. While they're out in the countryside, they meet a nice family that houses them for a while until they figure out that the man with the yellow hat is in fact a fugitive. Because I didn't know it was a high crime to steal elephants, which I guess in this case it is. But George discovers a newspaper and hands it to the man with the yellow hat. And on the paper, it shows that the elephant is missing its family. The elephant used to be a part of a zoo and then was removed from its family, being used for magic shows. But George hands the paper to the man with the yellow hat, fully understanding what the headline meant. The man with the yellow hat even asks about the paper. And not only does George understand every single question he's being asked about the newspaper, he also understands the problem that the elephant is facing. This is the equivalent of asking your dog, why is it bringing this ball everywhere? And it answers every single question, the why, the what, the where, and when. And this tells us that George has only been getting smarter. Because compared to the first film, George barely understood what was going on. He didn't understand his surroundings, and he only knew what the man with the yellow hat was doing. So he followed him around blindly, just making a mess of things. Come to the second movie, he now understands English and what the man with the yellow hat is trying to say. The thing is, animals do not understand English the way that we truly understand them. They understand tones and sounds, and they associate that with meaning. For example, when I say the phrase bear naked, do you imagine a bear that's naked, or do you imagine someone that is naked? If you said that to an animal, the animal wouldn't understand any of that. They would just understand that you are upset about murmur. So no matter how much you talk to your dog or your cat, they don't truly understand exactly what you're saying, but they can feel what you're saying. But that's why George is special, because he understands everything that the man with the yellow hat is saying. We see this throughout the whole movie. But if you're still not convinced, George goes to space in the third movie. Now, in my opinion, the third film is the way better film than the second one, as it does a better job at storytelling, the whys, the hows, and where they get anything. And the third film actually follows all of the previous events that happened in the second film, with George and the man with the yellow hat being regarded as a hero that actually returned an elephant back to their family. And in the third film, the man with the yellow hat is actually now the director of the museum, and he is approached by GSA agents, which stands for the Global Space Agency. And these GSA agents approached the man with the yellow hat and George with the opportunity to go to space. Apparently, they left some type of piece of equipment that controls the weather up on a satellite that is now non-functional. But because that piece of equipment is custom made, they have to retrieve that piece so that way they can continue doing their things in Africa. They're trying to stop flooding happening inside of Central Africa so that way the animals in the ecosystem is safe. That's why the movie is titled Back to the Jungle. But George and the man with the yellow hat agree to go to space. The GSA director, also known as Houston, which is kind of funny, explicitly states that George has to go through space training. And what do you know? George actually completes all of the space training. And you have to understand that a monkey completed NASA scientist training. Now, according to the NASA website, astronauts go through rigorous training of not only educational, which takes more than 2 years, they also go through bodily training that also takes another 2+ years. And this training includes a variety of different simulations that they have to go through. This includes motion training, orbit training, practicing moon and spacewalks. This also includes aircraft training where they simulate 0 Gs, and of course, underwater training where they get used to pressure. George seemingly completes all of these tests and training. The only problem with this is that the movie doesn't directly tell us how long this takes. But even if it took a short amount of time or a long amount of time, a monkey still completed NASA astronaut training. So not only at this point does George understand computer systems, understand English, and even understands that he is a self and understands the complexities of that, George takes it a step further. George tries to speak back to the man with the yellow hat. After getting lost in the jungles of South Africa, the man with the yellow hat then states that he wants George to be more cautious, and George actually replies back. And George kind of tries to repeat that back, saying, "Exercise caution?" Like we said, normal animals do not understand context or what words mean, or even if they have connotative or denotative meanings. And George, by the third movie, is asking for clarification so that way he can understand what those meanings are. Even when we glance over to the TV show a little bit, we find that George also has an internal monologue where he tries to understand the world around him. And while you could say this is the narrator is often describing exactly how George feels, and he responds to it inside of the show. This is different than a narrator describing events that are happening. This is actually describing what George is thinking in that moment. All these signs tell us that George has advanced intelligence. We can only draw one singular conclusion from all of this information. George is actually an alien, and the ancient Zagwa people actually worshipped him with this shrine in the first film. George uses his curiosity to help solve everybody else's problems, but it's almost magical the way he does it. With his superior intelligence, he's able to understand the world around him a bit differently and a bit better than the humans around him. And above all, his name is Curious George, which matches the poetic description that they put inside of the idol in the very first film. But is that a coincidence? I think not. And of course, if you haven't watched any of the other videos on this channel, make sure you check those out right down below. And of course, I'll ruin your childhood in those too. And I'll see you in another video. Bye-bye. The city of Danville, located in the tri-state area. Is this a place to live in and have your family thrive? Or is this something you and your family should flee forever and never look back?